Have you ever wondered what happens when the man everyone admires behind closed doors becomes something unrecognizable? Have you ever watched a woman disappear? Not all at once, but piece by piece until there's almost nothing left. Have you ever asked yourself why the people with the most power always seem to walk away clean? This is the story of Diana Merritt, and this is the story of how she made sure Lawrence Merritt never walked away from anything again. Diana was 26 when she married him. She was working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Charleston, South Carolina. Smart, careful with numbers, the kind of woman who kept her receipts and her promises. Lawrence was 41, a city councilman with his name on a new community center and his face on campaign billboards that smiled down at traffic on every major road through town. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, completely, effortlessly, like breathing. He remembered the names of waiters. He held doors. He called Diana's mother on her birthday before Diana even thought to remind him. They dated for 14 months. He proposed at a restaurant she'd mentioned once, in passing, on their second date. She cried. She said yes. She thought she understood who he was. She didn't. The first time Lawrence hit her, they had been married for 9 months. It was a Tuesday evening in February. Diana had come home from work 40 minutes later than she'd told him she would. A client call had run long, she'd texted him, and he was already standing in the kitchen when she walked through the door. She didn't notice the stillness in him right away. She was pulling off her coat, talking about the call, saying something about rescheduling dinner. Then his hand connected with the side of her face, and the sound was so loud and so wrong that for a moment she couldn't process what had happened. He was apologizing before she even hit the counter. He was crying before she started to. He said he didn't know what came over him. He said it would never happen again. He held her face in both hands and looked at her like she was everything. And she was so shaken, so certain this was an aberration, a terrible, impossible aberration, that she let him hold her. It happened again 6 weeks later, and then again. What people never understand, Diana would come to think, is how slowly it builds. It isn't one dramatic moment, it's 1,000 small adjustments. She stopped staying late at work. She stopped seeing her college friend Priya, who Lawrence had never liked. She stopped wearing certain colors he found attention-seeking. She rerouted her entire life around his moods without ever making a single conscious decision to do so. By the time she understood what was happening to her, she had already lost so much of herself that she couldn't find the edges of who she used to be. Lawrence was meticulous about control. He put their finances in his name after the first year, framing it as simplifying their joint accounts. He checked her phone not aggressively, but regularly, the way someone checks the weather. He didn't isolate her completely. That would have been too obvious for a man in his position. But he made her world smaller in ways that were hard to name. When she tried to explain it to herself, the words sounded thin. He doesn't like when I go out without telling him. He prefers I don't talk about our personal life with coworkers. He gets quiet when I disagree with him in front of other people. Each thing alone sounds manageable. Together they were a cage with no visible bars. The bruises were always somewhere clothing could cover. Lawrence was strategic about that too. He was, in every way that the public could see, an exemplary husband. He attended Diana's work events with his hand at the small of her back and his smile at full wattage. He spoke about her in interviews, and there were always interviews, always a camera nearby, as his incredible wife, the woman who kept him grounded. People loved him for it. People loved them together. There was a woman named Sylvia Crane. She was the deputy director of the Parks Department and had worked closely with Lawrence for 3 years before Diana ever heard her name. Diana noticed the way he spoke about Sylvia differently from other colleagues. Not more warmly, but more carefully, with a particular flatness that was its own kind of signal. She started paying attention. It took 4 months to confirm what she already knew. What she didn't expect was Sylvia's awareness of her situation. She found out later that Sylvia had seen Lawrence lose his temper at Diana once at a City Hall fundraiser. A brief controlled flash of something in a back hallway, witnessed and dismissed. Sylvia had not dismissed it. By then Diana had been quietly doing something no one knew about. It started with her phone. 18 months into the marriage, after a particularly bad night that left her with 2 cracked ribs, she told the ER had resulted from a fall on wet pavement. Diana began recording. Small things at first. She set her phone on silent, placed it face down on the kitchen counter, and let it run. She photographed her injuries with a cheap prepaid phone she'd bought with cash from a grocery store, stored inside a tampon box in the bathroom cabinet. She created an email account using the free Wi-Fi at the public library 3 blocks from her office, an account Lawrence had no knowledge of, and every week she sent herself a new email, dates, descriptions, photographs, the name of every doctor she'd seen and every lie she'd told them. She wasn't sure what she was building toward. She just knew she needed to build it. The person she finally told was her mother's younger sister, Aunt Carol. Not her mother, because her mother adored Lawrence and Diana couldn't bear to watch that change in real time. Carol lived in Raleigh, was twice divorced, had worked as a paralegal for 11 years, and had a particular quality that Diana had always appreciated. She listened without performing her reaction. Diana drove to Raleigh on a Saturday in March, told Lawrence she was attending a regional accounting seminar, and sat at Carol's kitchen table for 4 hours. She showed Carol the email account. She showed her the photographs. She told her everything in the order it happened, and when she finished, her coffee was cold and Carol had not said a word. Then Carol said, "How long have you been keeping this?" "A little over 2 years, Diana said. Carol was quiet for another moment. "We need a lawyer, not me, a real one. And you need to keep doing exactly what you've been doing." What followed was 14 months of the most disciplined performance of Diana's life. She smiled at fundraisers. She stood next to Lawrence at the groundbreaking for a youth sports complex with his name on the signage, and she clapped and she laughed at the right moments. She was the perfect councilman's wife. She was also methodically completing her exit. The lawyer Carol found was a woman named Elaine Fortis, who specialized in domestic violence cases involving high-profile or politically connected perpetrators. Elaine had handled 7 cases in the past decade, where the abuser's public reputation had been weaponized to discredit the victim. She had won 5 of them. She reviewed Diana's documentation and said nothing for a long time. "This," she finally said, setting down the folder, "is extraordinary. Is it enough?" Diana asked. "If you can get audio," his voice, not just his hands. "Yes." Diana got audio. It took 3 separate occasions over the next 2 months. The clearest recording was from a Thursday in October, 8 minutes long, Lawrence's voice unmistakable as he told Diana, in very specific terms, what would happen to her if she ever spoke to anyone about their marriage. He was calm during this speech. That was the detail that stopped Elaine cold when she listened to it. Not rage, not volume, just a man explaining a consequence the way someone explains a late fee. "He knows exactly what he's doing," Elaine said. "Yes," Diana said, "he always has." The plan, when it came together, was precise. Diana did not disappear dramatically. She did not leave in the night with a bag in her fear. That was not the plan. The plan was a Wednesday in November, a day Lawrence was scheduled to be in Columbia for a state legislative meeting that would run through the evening. Diana had confirmed his schedule through his assistant 3 days prior, casually, mentioning she wanted to plan a dinner. His assistant had been helpful. That morning, Diana made Lawrence his coffee, handed it to him as he reviewed his notes at the kitchen table, kissed his cheek, and told him she'd see him that evening. He left at 7:45. She watched his car until it turned off their street. Then she moved. She had 90 minutes. Carol was already waiting 2 hours away. Diana took the documents Elaine had specified, financial records, her own identification, the prepaid phone, a small bag of necessities she had packed in increments over 3 weeks and stored at her office. She left behind everything Lawrence had given her. The jewelry, the credit cards, the life that looked so good in photographs. At 9:15, Elaine filed a civil protection order. At 9:30, a courier delivered sealed envelopes to 3 local news stations, the editor of the Charleston Post and Courier, and 2 members of the City Council's Ethics Committee. Each envelope contained copies of Diana's documentation, photographs of injuries with dates, medical records, audio transcripts, and a 4-page written account Diana had composed with Elaine over the previous month. Lawrence's phone started ringing at 11:03. While he was still in Columbia. He was back in Charleston by 1:30. His attorney met him at the house. By that time, the Post and Courier had already spoken to Elaine on the record, and one of the local television stations had confirmed they were reviewing the materials. Lawrence's communications director, a young man named Patrick, who had worked for him for 3 years and who, Diana had always thought, seemed vaguely uncomfortable in his presence, released a statement saying the councilman categorically denied all allegations and was cooperating fully with any inquiry. That statement was retracted 11 hours later. What Lawrence had not known, what he had not been able to account for, because he had never imagined Diana capable of it, was that Sylvia Crane had been waiting. Sylvia had kept her own notes. She had not been a victim herself, but she had been a witness, more times than Diana knew, and when Elaine's office reached out to her quietly 6 weeks before the filing, Sylvia had agreed immediately. Her statement corroborated Diana's account of the fundraiser incident and 2 others. She described, in specific detail, a conversation Lawrence had with her privately in his office in which he had expressed his belief that Diana was difficult and needed management. In the language of a domestic abuse case, management lands differently than Lawrence had perhaps intended. The criminal investigation opened within 2 weeks of the filing. The charges included felony assault and battery, criminal domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature, and, after financial records Diana had documented showed a pattern of coercive financial control. Charges under South Carolina's economic abuse statutes that had only recently been strengthened by legislation Lawrence himself had publicly supported. That particular detail made it into every article. Diana was in Raleigh when she heard about the arrest. She was at Carol's kitchen table, the same one where she had sat 14 months earlier and said everything out loud for the first time. Carol had made the same coffee she always made, too strong and slightly bitter, and the television in the next room was on, because Carol always had the television on, and a reporter said Lawrence Merritt's name, and then Diana heard the rest of it. She didn't cry, she had thought she might. She sat there with both hands around her mug, and she breathed very carefully, and she felt something she had no exact word for. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter and more complicated. Like setting down something you've carried so long you'd forgotten it had weight. The trial lasted 11 days. Lawrence's defense leaned heavily on his public record, the community center, the youth sports complex, his years of civic service, his reputation. His attorney argued that Diana's documentation was manufactured, that the audio was taken out of context, that Sylvia Crane had a professional grievance against the councilman. The jury did not find these arguments persuasive. Lawrence Merritt was convicted on 4 of the 6 charges. He was sentenced to 14 years in the South Carolina Department of Corrections, with the possibility of parole after 7. He would serve that time without his council seat, without his campaign billboards, and without the name that had meant so much to him in the city he'd spent 2 decades building himself into. The morning after sentencing, Diana gave one interview. She did it from Carol's living room, by video call, with Elaine sitting off camera in case she needed her. The journalist was a woman who had covered the case from the beginning, and had treated Diana's account with both rigor and care. "What would you want people to understand?" the journalist asked. "Who are watching this, and maybe recognizing something in their own situation?" Diana was quiet for a moment. She had thought about this question before it was asked. She had thought about the women she knew were watching. The ones who'd heard their own marriage in her story. The ones who'd flinched at the word management, because they recognized the logic of it. "That you don't have to have the whole plan before you start," she said. "I didn't, I just started keeping records. I just started telling the truth to one person. That's where it begins. One record, one person, that's enough to start with." She paused, and that the thing he most counted on was my silence. For years my silence was the thing protecting him. Once I understood that. Once I really understood that silence was the structure holding everything up. I stopped being afraid of what would happen when it came down. 18 months after the trial, Diana Merritt, using her own name, a name she had never legally changed despite Lawrence's pressure to hyphenate it into something that included his, co-founded a nonprofit in Charleston called the Quiet Record Project. Its purpose was to provide free, confidential documentation support and legal resources to survivors of domestic abuse, with a specific focus on cases involving abusers in positions of public trust. The name came from something Carol had said to her once, early on, when Diana had asked why she kept collecting evidence when she didn't even know if she'd ever use it. "Because a quiet record," Carol had said, "is louder than anything he'll ever say about you." The project's first year they helped 43 women. The second year, over 100. Lawrence's name does not appear anywhere on the organization's materials. He is referred to in the founding document only as a man who believed silence was permanent. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things.